Hello, everyone, and welcome to Capturing Dyke Culture, Photographers in Dialogue. This panel is part of the Curve Foundation's Beyond the Rainbow series, a groundbreaking conversation program that seeks to create an intersectional, multi-generational space touching on gender, queerness, race, ability, and activism of yesterday and today. Just a note that this is being recorded, and we do have closed captions enabled if you need to turn them on. So the Curve Foundation champions lesbian, queer women, transgender, and non-binary people's stories and culture through intergenerational programming and community building. Today's programming is a celebratory feature of Lesbian Visibility Week, which Curve hosts across North America. In addition to Beyond the Rainbow and Lesbian Visibility Week, we steward the Curve Magazine archive, which is free and
There's a bunch of people. Yeah, there's a
accessible.
whole panel going on.
Yeah, and activate its documentation of 30 years of lesbian culture through our community programming
Huh?
initiative, Curve Conversations. Just a
No,
reminder
they just
for folks to mute themselves when they come into
yeah,
the
I do,
room.
but I can.
Let me
I mean,
just,
I saw my badge is like,
I'm going to go in here and see who's
oh my God, I
online.
was unmuted.
Okay, thanks for that. So today's panel is going to be really special. We're going to hear from 5 queer photographers who are engaging in a dialogue surrounding what constitute an impactful image, how we create collective memory through visual media, and the evolution of lesbian and queer photography throughout the decades. We would like to note that we will be addressing these topics with a gender-expansive and trans-inclusive mindset. We will be having a brief Q&A portion at the end of the program, so please save any questions you have until that time. You'll be able to raise your hand either virtually or physically, or you can write your question in the chat and I'll read it out loud. So just again, another reminder, please mute yourselves during this event, unless you are saying a question at the end during our Q&A section. Now I'm going to introduce our panelists and then we'll let them get talking. So first off, and we will also be showing some work on the shared screen while I say their bios. So first off, we have Phyllis Christopher, whose body of work documenting lesbian visibility, sexuality, and protest, titled Dark Room, San Francisco Sex and Protest, 1988 to 2002, was published by Bookworks in 2022. She's been documenting LGBTQI plus culture with an emphasis on lesbian visibility for the past 35 years. Phyllis lives in England, so thank you so much for tuning in, Phyllis, where she conducts workshops, co-facilitates a community darkroom at the Newbridge Project, and continues to document the LGBTQ plus community. Next, we have Naima Green, who is an artist and educator who documents individuals and communities' vibrant relationships to place and pleasure. She engages with various photographic forms, sound, installation, and experimental film. She frames picture making and her praxis as a continuum, and her praxis as a continuum, and her still images as kinetic living histories. Morgan Gwenwald is one of a small group of out lesbian photographers who emerged during the early days of the gay rights movement. Her work has been featured on many book covers and in newsletters, journals, magazines, and in exhibitions. Early on, she took up the challenge of portraying the diversity of lesbian sexuality. Her work was subsequently featured in the first and subsequent issues of On Our Backs. She also serves as a coordinator for the Lesbian History Archives. You can see the founder, co-founder Deb right there. Then we have photographer Jessica Tanzer, who created a body of work from 1987 to 1994, which did more than capture fleeting moments in time. She dismantled the crippling mechanisms of censorship and brought to life bold and unyielding imagery of queer sexuality in a time when the LGBTQ community was grappling with an AIDS-ravaged terrain and searching for a new and safe way to express and conduct and celebrate sexuality while facing the reminder of death and loss every day. Then we have Salgu Wissmath, who is a non-binary Korean-American photographer and the communications director for Diversify Photo. They were formerly a Hearst Photo Fellow at the San Antonio Express News and the San Francisco Chronicle. They're dedicated to decolonizing visual storytelling by engaging in ethical storytelling by and for people of color and the queer community. Their personal work explores the intersections of mental health, queer identity, and faith from a conceptual documentary approach. And last but not least, we have our moderator and my colleague, Sunny Leerasanthanah. They lead Curve's communications. Beyond Curve, Sunny is a multidisciplinary visual artist as well as a photographer specializing in queer portraiture. They were most recently a studio artist in residence at Artists Alliance, Inc. in New York City. Their ongoing works include capturing portraits at Fire Island and New York's queer country dance scene. Now I will hand the reins over to Sunny and let's get these artists talking.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Julia. And thank you to everyone for being here.
especially the panelists. I was saying earlier that this is a dream come true for me, and to have us all coming in from so many different geographic locations at once is really sweet. Well, to kick things off, I wanted to talk about what we're here for, really, which is photography and queer community, this beautiful intersection that we can all resonate with. And I was wondering, how has your photography practice brought you to queer community? How have you found community members in that way? Or how have you led community members to finding themselves through your photography? I'm thinking specifically, maybe to start with Morgan, you had the Lesbian Photographers Directory from 1982, I believe, in which it was a resource for people to find other queer photographers. Could you share more about that?
Yeah, the Money for Women Fund founded that. It was some very small grant that Barbara Deming made available. And Julie, I don't know what her last name is now, managed it. So that supported the cost of it, but it was total handmade on a Selectric typewriter, and the cover was printed somewhere, but very simple. And it was an effort to connect with other lesbian photographers at the time. I knew a few in New York City, and there were a couple in San Francisco I was aware of, but I thought I'd do a call since I was at the archives and had connections to do outreach that way.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So, and Phyllis, I've seen from an interview you've said that your catalyzing moment with photography kind of happened hand in hand with your moment of entering San Francisco. That you had showed up with your camera. My understanding was there were protests happening and you started photographing. Do you feel like that also allowed you to find community through your photography?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when you say community, I remember that era of the early 90s, and Jessica will remember this too. Like, everyone was so desperate to create culture and to create community and to know each other. So women were so enthusiastic to model because they knew how important it was in order to see each other. There was no, that was the main purpose of my photography then, was like, let's create a mirror. Let's hold up this beautiful mirror of these beautiful women. Because we had come out of a really dark time where we were being told we were ugly and, you know, drinking in dark bars and everything. And then San Francisco to me was just like a festival of people feeling good about themselves. And that's always been, and actually as like a very shy person, it was my way into um, clubs and meeting friends and certainly sex clubs, which I photographed in, but I was way too shy to actually go in without a camera, you know?
Mhm.
So yeah, to me, it created community personally and then ended up creating a family. But I started creating community on a larger level.
Mhm. Totally.
Yeah.
Can other people resonate with that as well? Not just, you finding people to photograph, but people being enthusiastic about coming to you and being photographed.
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to jump in. I feel like um something that Phyllis just said really resonated with me. Like I also can be a very shy person, especially with new people, and I feel like the camera allowed me a way to like not only look but also ask questions and kind of invite people into my process too, that I probably wouldn't always do otherwise, at least when I was first beginning. And so it felt like a tool and a way to and it did like make so many friendships. I agree, who are also now family for me too. And I think people also really want that recognition and also self-recognition sometimes. Like I've photographed some of the same people for 15 years, and it's also about creating images that don't represent just like a fixed idea of that person, but being able to revisit and being able to change and grow together feels really important to me too.
I um I moved here in 1987 to go to the San Francisco Art Institute, and I moved here with my girlfriend Michelle Fisher, who also wrote for Curve magazine. And my mom came out in 1977 when I was 11. So I spent my tween and teen years in a house full of lesbians who couldn't express themselves outside of the house in Portland, Oregon. So we moved here in '87. It was like a smorgasbord of freedom and affection in public. And I was a student at the San Francisco Art Institute in photography. And so that's where I got started. And I've always been a visual learner, and I wanted to put out what I grew up with that was inside our house, but put it out in a way that was inviting for people that would be threatened by the material, inviting for them to look at. And at the same time, photographing safe sex to teach people visually. So that photograph of Rosa and Daria, you see a rubber glove hanging out of Daria's pocket, and it was because the shoot had a rubber glove, and so I did a lot of work for honor backs for Curve with Michelle or Deneuve, and also for ACT UP and Queer Nation. And Queer Nation was what is often forgotten, but it was really, really effective and important for gay visibility.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is a beautiful segue to another question I have for all of you, if you could take turns answering. That so often in queer photography, we're photographing people who are vulnerable or people who are closest to us. And communities like kink communities, underground communities, erotic photography, really intimate scenes, trans folks, gender nonconforming folks, and Salgu, I know your projects also, you've been photographing LGBTQ minors. So there's a lot of care that we have when we photograph these subjects, that we have to extend like almost this protection of their identities as well. And given that this is Lesbian Visibility Week, how do you all balance this container between visibility and also protecting the people we're photographing or taking care of them?
I can jump in. I think for me, like it always comes down to, the people I'm photographing, like their comfortability. So I'm always having check-ins, around consent. First of all, do they want to be photographed? Are they aware and okay that their photo is going to be public and published? And, they might say yes today, but my project might not come up till 5 years from now. And 5 years ago and today, the political climate is very different. So maybe they're not comfortable anymore. So when I do know something's going to be published, I always try to check in with folks. Hey, it's going to be here. It's going to be an exhibit. It's going to be in this publication. Are you still okay with it? And most of the time people are, because they want to tell their story if they chose to be photographed in the first place. But sometimes people are like, no, I don't, have this job and I'm not out at the job, so I can't be in this exhibit. Or some people, maybe I lose touch and I can't really confirm. So I really try to just have like check-ins with folks ongoing, especially because my projects can take years, and someone agreeing to be photographed 5 years ago may be very different than being photographed and published today. And then you mentioned minors, like in particular, I take extra precautions with minors obviously checking with their parents, but also like sometimes their identity is not shown or their name is not used, either using only a first name or no name, even sometimes a pseudonym. So really making sure that they have ownership of how their photo will be shared.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that.
I do the same. I feel like I'm a steward of the bravery of the women and men that were in the photograph. So I stay in touch and make sure that they're in a time in their life where it's okay to show the work. Sorry, Morgan, did I interrupt?
I was just going to say my release forms back in the day specified that whether or not it was okay to be in a lesbian identified magazine, whether it was not okay to identify them in that way, whether it was okay to use their name or not with it. And they could, adjust it however they wanted. And this was all pre-social media. So basically I'm saying like, well, I'm sending these photos to On Our Backs, and do you want your face in them or not? How can this work? And I would always go back to the people I photographed with the contact sheets and let them tell me if there were any that they didn't like or didn't, the ones they did like, and they just mark them up. And that's what I'd work with. And I am having to do that same thing now, especially with people who were signing a release in the 80s. It is nothing like it was. And I've had people who totally transitioned and are in very different lives now than in the past. And they're hard to track down. And right now, I'm working on a book of my erotic photography. But in our current political climate, it's a really scary time for people to have their face out there in these kinds of erotic images. And many of the people I photographed, we didn't use their face much anyway. But I'm really glad to hear other people are behaving that way with it, because I think the whole consent piece is very important. And it's not just get them to sign a piece of paper, then you can go do what you want. That's not what we're about. Yeah. Because we're trust and community. And that's always more important than any image.
100%.
I could say a little something about that. I've gone back to working in black and white film. Oh, by the way, Morgan, I'm excited that you're doing a book. That's amazing. When will that, do you know when that will be out?
I have no idea.
Right. Okay.
I hope in my lifetime, okay?
I know that feeling.
That's the goal.
One of the good things about working in film was it gave the models total control as far as my agreement with them. They knew that I would process it at home and then they would look at it and they would give their okay for everything. So any intimate work that I'm doing something called The Body in Peril, and it's all about the changing body. And I'm doing that in film again. One of the reasons is that reason. And for my book coming out, I got in touch with everybody, almost everybody in the book. And 99% of the women were just like so happy it was happening. So it was still that spirit of, yes, I remember why we did this and I still 100% want this to happen. But like you're saying, the consent is the number one reason we did the work. So
I have one person that is not ready yet, and they're my favorite photographs, so they haven't been shown. I'm chomping at the bit. Can't wait till she's ready.
That would be amazing to see.
Yeah.
Can I just throw out a little bit of history too for the younger people in the audience? That there were things going on in the 60s and 70s where if you had photographs to get developed, you usually took them to your local drugstore. Unless you were a photographer and had a darkroom and knew how to do that. So we all had access to that, I assume, in our early days. But there were times that the FBI would pull negatives out of those stores and they would go after people. So there was a police surveillance going on through them. So that really was an important factor, that we all had access. We developed the film. We did the prints. It was nowhere else out of our hands. Now, I don't think things on smartphones are all that safe, but you don't have to take it to the drugstore anymore anyway to get your images. And that made there be many fewer of us in the 70s and 80s taking these photos, because it was who had the privilege of having access and knowledge to have a darkroom and that equipment.
Being a student helped. An art student, yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, Morgan,
In
Okay.
sorry, I just thought of when Phyllis Morgan and I were in San Francisco, and Franco, the publisher of Curve, hi Franco, there was like a micro genre area, 18th and Castro. There was so much activity and activism and art. And I lived on 18th and Castro. Looking out, I would see Franco across the street, who worked at the bookshop while she was starting her magazine. Up the street, just a few doors, and across the street was On Our Backs. And there was this, it was like this whole little ecosystem that I really hope somebody writes a book about sometime, because it was an amazing time for all of us.
When I hear Franco talk about that time, I wish I could just teleport and be there in person, because it seems like we just can't replicate that anymore. You know, it's just you had to be there. So
Yeah.
that's really special.
Maybe we will when the government completely
Yeah.
takes away our rights, because that's what was happening then.
Mhm.
That's going to be the
push
silver
and pull.
lining. Yeah.
Sorry, Phyllis, you were saying?
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Jessica, but I agree with you. I think in times like this, that's the silver lining, is that the community comes together and finds ways to communicate. And one of the things about working in film back in those days is that because of that trust, I always say, like, my book would have never, like, that body of work would have never happened in modern times because of phones and the internet and people being terrified of it just being shot around the world by mistake or intentionally. So I'd be really interested to, like, how the younger photographers here work with, you know, do you think that people self-censor more than they used to? Or is it just a different kind of censorship? Because of the possibility of things being shared with absolutely everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I use social media way less for that reason too, and thinking about not only how things are shared, but then thinking about just intellectual property and who now, you know, just there are so many different layers. And so I think when I am having exhibitions or when I'm making books, it's like that's where the work is. It's not necessarily online. And it's hard because I want to be able to see, you know, you would think that now with this way we can exchange information that there would be more accessible and more to see, but I think it's kind of this both and of like with that being the case, that there's also this kind of foreclosing on how comfortable we feel sharing if we don't know where it's going to end up or who's going to claim that they own it now, you know.
Well, Naima, for your project specifically too, I'm very curious, like you use a lot of staging, like a lot of work collaboration with the portrait sitters. Do you feel like that element of staging, collaboration is actually a very useful tool to expressing queerness and gender identity with your subjects?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking about like Pursuit specifically, which is a deck of playing cards that was inspired by Catherine Opie's Dyke deck that she made in 1994. I did a reimagination of that in Brooklyn in 2018 and 2019. And it really felt important for me it was my first time doing an open call, like a major open call. It was my first time doing a studio-based project. I love working with natural light and outdoors. And it felt really important that I not just keep repeating or reinforcing like what a queer Brooklyn looked like, and that it wasn't just the same people that I was always photographing. And so the collaboration around inviting people into the project and people reaching out to me about participating, like 65% of the people I was meeting for the first time on set. And so that brings and brought so much to the work too, because people are just I asked people to come in whatever stage of dress or undress. They could bring props, they could bring kind of whatever, however they wanted to represent themselves. And those are just things that I could not dream up how to, and I don't want to actually dream up how to represent every single person. Like I want it to be a conversation. I want it to be an invitation. And I want it to be also just like a way that we're responding to each other.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a beautiful project. And I feel like that also resonates with what Phyllis was saying too, right? Like in a way where perhaps that you had people bring themselves into the space, that they also have this ownership of the of how the images turned out, of how they're represented, that transcends like this fear of being misrepresented or having their identities misunderstood in a way. Would you say that?
Yes,
About-
are you asking me? Yeah,
Oh, about both of you, I guess. Yeah, if
oh,
that's
okay.
the
All right, well, I'll
portrait
just say, yeah, I've
dynamic.
always thought of my work as a collaboration. Definitely,
Totally.
I'm interested in documenting
Hmm.
and portraying somebody's reality. Yeah, I
Hmm.
don't want to throw too much of myself onto it.
Hmm. And with the panelists here who, aside from, more staged portraiture, when you're out there doing street photography, capturing protests, rallies, working as like a photojournalist, do you feel like the candidness can also be a tool for expression in a very different way? Or do you find it to be a sort of similar way with more like staged photography?
It was for Phyllis.
Are you asking me? I'm sorry. Are you
Oh
asking
no,
me?
I'm asking everyone here.
Oh,
I
I'm
think
sorry. I
I
thought
all
don't
it
of
was
want to
you
for
have
Phyllis.
well, all of you have done beautiful, on the ground photography as well, I would say. Like Salgu, you're a working photojournalist. You've covered so many different types of on the ground photography, where I'm assuming you don't get to set up the shots as much as be there, and photograph things as they unfold. And Jessica, Phyllis, and Morgan too, your works in the 80s through the 90s and 2000s. My understanding is that you've shown up to spaces and with your camera equipped, and you're trying to document as much as possible.
Not me. I didn't like carrying my camera out with me, but I also uh, hadn't really developed an eye for documentary style photography. So I was really inspired by the classic art. So I really loved working in the studio. But
Yeah,
now
similar
actually,
to
then I made a mock up for a book and realized I have a whole book of photographs from outside, from the parades and all of that.
I basically had my camera with me from when I was in high school. And I was able to take a couple of courses at the local college because they didn't have anything at Tallahassee in the high school, surprisingly. Um, and then I was very immersed in the women's community in Tallahassee. And I lived in a lesbian feminist collective with Dorothy Allison and Flo
Oh,
Hollis, and we moved to DC. So I shot the Tallahassee community through all sorts of things. We did a bookstore. We had a project on campus. We did childcare. We did all things. We did conferences. And there was the March for the ERA happening. And we had a big lesbian banner out for that. And this was all in the early 70s.
can I ask you a question about that, Morgan? Did the women wear enameled lavender stars to show that they were lesbians during the
Not
time?
really. No.
In Portland and in our my mother's community, everybody would wear lavender stars.
Yeah.
So I've
No,
always been curious
that
if
was
it
not a
was just
thing. If
local.
a blue tattoo is a thing in Buffalo, the Buffalo community, many women there did that. T-shirts, blue jeans, had
One extra
haircuts.
button
That's
unbuttoned on the
that's the thing
shirt.
they did. Um, but I photographed all the time,
Mhm,
and lovers,
mhm.
friends in the collective, the projects we're working on, just constantly. I have thousands, literally thousands of negatives. and lots of it, well, and then I was in DC for a couple of years. I was at Sagres and photographed that. And for some reason, I seem to have been maybe the only photographer that was at the Barnard Conference in 82. And I have photographs of that and the day after when LSM did the speak out about what happened at that conference. So it just goes, it's always been a part of my life, basically up until the point that smartphones have come in and there's cameras everywhere now. And I'm like, well, I really don't have to do this anymore. Because there was an era where if I wasn't getting these pictures, they're not happening. You know, and that was usually the 70s and the 80s, and then it started, there were more of us and more of us.
Is your work in an archive anywhere?
It's in my apartment.
I hope it goes to a great archive.
That needs to go into an archive.
Yeah.
I'm very aware of archives. A lot of questions about it. One of the important things for me about my work is that it's accessible and it can be used by the community. I don't want it locked up anywhere where it's hard to get to. You know, I want my credit on it. I don't want to give it away. But my whole life, most of my work has just been used in the community, in community publications. I don't get paid for it. I always figured I was making a really good deal if I could get my film and chemicals covered.
Yeah.
You know, so I didn't have to do that out of pocket, but the photography itself was my love and my volunteer work for the community. And so at this point, I want to make sure that work can move forward into the next generation and the next, and is available to be part of the next stories.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that part. As Naima said, you know, your work has built upon Catherine Opie's work with the Pursuit deck. I guess this is a great question for everyone that how do you hope that your works are built upon by future generations, by other photographers, by other queer community members?
I don't know. But I do know that I put my work, I think Phyllis might have also, into Brendan Marston's Human Sexuality collection at Cornell University. And I'm just glad that it has a home where it'll go on to have evidence-based history access, you know, that's accessible to anybody. So I'm just really pleased to have it somewhere where people will learn. But that's all.
That's a complicated thing, though, because it is in an institution that is a patriarchal institution. And we're seeing what's happening to colleges and universities all over our country right now being bullied. And someone who's in charge of our country can now step into the Smithsonian collection and start weeding through it if they so desire. So it doesn't mean that because you've got it with someone as wonderful as Brenda right now, well, she could be fired. You know, everything can change, and all of that stuff could be burned.
It's definitely not lost on me.
Whereas grassroots archives, why they may be struggling with a whole nother array of issues, I mean, I don't doubt for a second that as long as there are people working with the Lesbian History Archives, our history there is going to be protected because it's us. You know, and we have all these young people coming in who are real revved up about protecting this and collecting more and collecting from today. And it's got a, but on the other hand, we're buried with stuff that hasn't been processed yet. It's a mixed thing, whether grassroots, and there's some wonderful grassroots archives all over this country and new ones popping up all the time. It's an important tradition, I think, but yeah, it's a danger with the mainstream archives.
Would you say that with everyone's work here, just by capturing queer identities, documenting everybody, you know, around us, people we don't know, that we are contributing to a living archive, even if not, you know, an institutional archive, that there's ways we can build upon each other's works and add on to that?
Absolutely.
Mhm.
I don't know if any of you had the opportunity to see the exhibit Images on Which to Build that was at
Beautiful.
Leslie Lohman for, I think, 3 months. It was in Ohio somewhere, and then it ended up in Chicago. But Ariel Goldberg did this wonderful collection of various things that happened in the 70s and 80s using film, slides, and how we used those materials, those photographic ways of sharing and building community. So it's
I'm
always
putting
been an important part of it. I mean, that was just an amazing show. But it was very thoughtful about how that works. And when you stand back and you look at it, we did a whole lot with slideshows.
Yeah.
You know,
I
I
love that you
say,
show there. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I would just say to everybody here that it's very important to keep your work cataloged. And if you're shooting digitally, I really believe in books. Like if you can't get a book published, because who's going to publish us, you know? It's very difficult. Make your own little blurb books, or you know, I use Snapfish here, and just have those someplace safe. Um, because I've shot so many everything digitally for the last 20 years, and it's not accessible. It's all on hard drives and everything. When I look into my archive, it's all in files. All my actual film work is more accessible. And I know it can be burnt. You know, I could have a house fire, but there's something very tangible and beautiful about books. So I would encourage everybody to think about their work. And I'm lecturing myself too, because I need to do some more and you know, catalog my stuff better.
well,
Yeah,
even if you don't do a book, if you print out on paper your best images from a year or an event, and you just put them in a little box, those will probably last a whole lot longer than any kind of electronic flash drive or whatever that changes every few years and then you can't access it anymore.
Yeah.
Um, it doesn't even have to be in a book, but printing it out so that it exists on paper.
Paper
You
products.
know, the ink isn't that bad.
yeah, I'm curious if for people who shoot digital or even film here, how do you keep your photos, alive outside of, being on screen, or if not through social media, how do you circulate those? Do you go to publish in zines, self-publish, reach out to journals, reach out to other photographers? Yeah, how do you keep that thread alive?
I think that's a good question that I don't have the right answer to, but I think there's a lot of good advice on here. The idea of making even just simple blurb books, self-published books, have a little coffee table book in your apartment or prints. You know, it is like talking about the archives and being inspired from past archives and then inspiring others. I think is so important. I know, like with a lot of my work, it is inspired by other photographers' work that I've seen that's inspired me to make my own work. So I would really hope, future artists are also inspired by mine. That would be awesome. I'd really like that. But then they need to be able to see the work. And so if it's just living on our hard drive, it's not being seen as much. So that's a good push to try to make some physical iterations. But when I do print my work, like for exhibitions, I always try to have a smaller option that's very accessible. Because like Morgan was saying, I want my work to be accessible to my community. Like I don't want some really expensive, out of your price range prints that no one will buy. Like I'll make 8x10s or maybe even smaller prints that people can afford. And so that's really important to me when I think about showing my work and whatnot. So something to keep in mind going forward.
Mhm. What about for everyone else in terms of how you keep your photographic catalog alive? I'm taking notes, so.
I don't. I mean, I try to put just a few pictures online because I want to do books before I put everything out on the internet. I think I'm crotchety about electronic about the internet.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a crotchety old analog photographer.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know we have a few minutes left before the Q&A portion. So I wanted to hear about what everyone's current, inspirations are when it comes to photographing queer community and thinking about visibility. Is there something you've seen recently that's really stuck with you? Are there projects you're working on? If there's someone else in the panel here whose works you've been thinking about, I'd love to hear all about these things.
Well, just sorry, before we get into that, I just wanted to respond to your last question because
Mhm.
something that I've been thinking about is um, just archiving in general and also how overwhelming it can be and feel. And I would love like for just like the collective we to think about like how do we actually can we start archiving workshops? Can we like what are small ways to actually tangibly build things that it doesn't feel like because I can look, I have stacks and stacks of binders of film that I'm just like, oh my God, I can't deal with that, you know?
Yeah.
And so how do we actually make our work not only accessible to ourselves, but like how do we start to build these catalogs and build these archives so that the work can move more freely and more easily because, we know where things are. And um, I think that that's also like another starting point too.
Yeah, to respond to that, I feel like, when, for example, my recent studio residency, like a big part of it was storage, was having place for, the film catalogs, like the hard drives that build up.
Mhm.
And my friend who was going to be here, Gwen, an artist and curator as well, she recently said to me that like part of being an artist is just like moving shit around from studio to studio or to your house. It's just like you have that archive with you at all times, and that's part of the work. But yeah, I'd love to learn like how do I do that in a way that's sustainable and not veer into hoarding because that's where I'm at right now. It's just like every ticket, every little thing, I like keep that. And Morgan, your show, well, the Leslie Lomas show, and that you were part of for Images to Build Upon, that really inspired me to keep like every little thing because those vitrines with like printouts from the 80s,
Yeah.
a small little print on our backs, like it was so cohesive and beautiful. And everything was just fragments into building uh, this image of community. Yeah, it was a gorgeous show. So.
The ephemera part's important.
Mhm.
When I go out, I photograph things all the time at the Gay Center, event after event after event, and there were always little flyers and things. And I have boxes full of them with notes on them about who the people were and what they were wearing, so I could write captions with their names on them properly for wherever it would get published in a newsletter or a local magazine or something.
Mhm.
And that's part of the archives. It's a really important part of it.
Mhm.
Um, and it's something there's so many things to think about in terms of archiving your work and stuff. We could talk for hours about it. But one thing I want to highlight is that if you put it someplace, like an archives, a grassroots or any archives, make sure, well, the big ones, they're going to want you to give them some kind of release on the material. But like you could put a collection in the Lesbian History Archives and you could stipulate on it that it's available for certain kinds of uses. So if you're gone or can't be found, the people there can say, well, yes, actually, you can use these for that paper you're working on, or you can use these for that show because we have permission from the photographer who put them here to do that. So many collections don't have any of the background information on who took the pictures. Did they give permission? Is it okay to publish them? Can you share them? At the Lesbian History Archives, basically most everything can be looked at, but lots of things can't be used because there was a decade or two we weren't getting that kind of information from people. So we don't
Mhm.
have it.
Yeah.
But with your own work, you really need to think about that too, because if you want to make it accessible, you've got to attach that permission.
Mhm. I'm thinking too that one of the my classes in grad school was about collecting, and there was this great quote that the professor said that was, I think, well, she was requoting Baudrillard, but one collects oneself. And I take that to heart. It's like all these little ephemera, even photography, to me is a type of collecting oneself and collecting the world around us. So yeah, to do that in an archival way seems really important. Yeah. But I wanted to make space for a few minutes before Q&A. If anyone wanted to share things they're working on, things that are delighting them this week, things that feel challenging with photography right now, open platform.
Well, I'm wondering who in America is willing to have shows with lesbian themed work in them. I had a major show here, but it was like an act of the goddess that it even happened when my book came out. But the show is sitting right here in my garage. And, you know, it's just so difficult. It continues to be so difficult for, I think, lesbians to get shown, lesbian work to get shown. So I was just wondering what your experience over there has been like. And I would say if you are younger, please keep all your ephemera. I just want to say that because I was thinking that when you were all talking about that. And I threw away much more than I was able to bring over to England. And I'm really sad about that. But I kept a lot of stuff too. But anyway, on another subject, that's what I'm wondering about because I'm looking back into my archive now and I'm thinking about family. I'm thinking about the family I have right now with my son. I'm thinking about my queer family and my biological family, and that's all in my archive. Then I would love to produce that as a show, but without funding, I don't know where we go with it. It's always a challenge, you know. So I was wondering how all you were dealing with the lack of general support that I'm seeing in the States.
I with what I had in the pipeline, I think it's not happening because of the current situation. And I've been talking about focusing on London and Paris because I've done well in those two cities. And I feel like at least for this 4 years, it's going to be tough in the States. For me, for what I was working on, it came to a halt.
Mm-hmm. Terrible.
Mm-hmm. For me,
never had any involvement with the art world, really. I was in art school in Tallahassee, and my graduation show didn't pass. It was about the women's revolution, strangely enough. So I've never really been part of that world or participated in it. And now I'm trying to do that to some degree because I'm trying to place images and collections. And this galleries have never been there for me at all. Bookstore, different light. I did a show there once. La Papaya, restaurants.
Mm-hmm.
You know, hanging things on the wall in businesses. That's always kind of been where we've been able to put our work. Because many of us have been so shut out of a gallery system. There's room for one lesbian, maybe, you know, per decade, or maybe two.
Mm-hmm.
In my early years, there was no room for lesbians. There just wasn't. This is pre-Mapplethorpe too, so you know it changes over time, for sure. But I think there's more. I see more happening with people making their own space for exhibiting their work, where you're not just doing it through an official gallery, but finding other ways to do it. And as part of other events, conferences, other things where images are brought in and shared. And zines have been a huge change for things too, a way of getting images out. So I'm, it's the gallery stuff is a very difficult path, and yeah, now especially. Yeah.
I wanted
Well,
to.
I just want to thank Curve and everyone who's worked on the show, and Franco and Julia and Sunny, for putting a lesbian show together. I wish I could see it. But yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, courageous publishers of lesbian work. Thank you, On Our Backs, and thank you, Curve, because it created careers of all sorts, comedians, musicians, photographers, writers.
Totally.
Yeah, we have to do it ourselves still.
I also do think that there are curators and scholars who are thinking about how to bring work into collections right now too. And I'm working on a show with Elizabeth Sherman, and it's all about queer, well, it's all about a few different things, but I'm staging these kind of faux families and queer families. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how it happens on kind of like a massive scale, but I do think that there are people who are paying attention and who are doing the best they can to bring also work into collection, which is also like a whole bureaucratic process as well. But yeah,
No,
always.
you do bring up a really good point, because if it wasn't for this the younger generations of queer curators, I would have never had a show. So I know that they're out there, and I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah. I'm gonna hop back in to start addressing some of the questions that we've got in the chat. We've got about 7 minutes left. And then I encourage all of our panelists to drop links to any current work that you've got, or just titles of things if you're analog, not digital. Allie, I think you're right. We might have addressed that question a little bit. So we'll move on to the second question of who is photographing 50-year-old plus bodies, whether erotic or not? How is it different than photographing young people, if at all?
I missed that. I'm sorry.
That's going to be
What is
my
that for
next
me?
project.
That will be a really wonderful project. The question is, who is photographing 50-year-old plus bodies, whether erotic or not, and how is it different than photographing young people, if at all?
I'm also working on a project called the Body in Peril, and it's about the aging body. And so far, the people it's about any sort of transition or illness, and using photography to deal with that. And so far, I think those who have come forward have been under 50, but I'm very wanting to photograph women my own age and older. So
I also think when I've tried and asked and invited people to sit, that there are just maybe some barriers that I'm not thinking about in terms of, I don't know what it is, but someone might say yes, and then kind of it never happens, or it takes, I don't know. I just have to, I'm trying to figure that out also. I think there are some people who I photograph who are definitely very enthusiastic, but I also think there's something about maybe like how their bodies have changed that they're like, oh, you don't want to photograph me. And I'm like, no, I do actually. That's why I'm extending this invitation. But it's something that I'm thinking about definitely, and I don't have an answer for. But
that's such an interesting question. Oh, does anybody else have a response to that before we move on? Okay. All right. So the next question we have is, do you have any advice for young lesbian photographers, specifically in creating space for oneself?
My advice is just keep shooting. Like Morgan said, she always had her camera with her. Phyllis did too. I wasn't much of a shooter, but I wish I was, because once you get the image of what your experience is, you kind of own that moment in time, and it's your asset forever. So there was a lot going on that is just a memory for me, not a memory I can put on paper. So I just say, keep shooting.
And also, I think just apply for things. Like my work was in so many untraditional art spaces for a really long time before I was working with museums or anything like that. So it's like showing in wine shops or showing in, turning someone's apartment into a gallery or turning, there's a lot of, or even doing something outside. Like there are a lot of possibilities, I think, for sharing work. And I think Morgan mentioned earlier making zines, but just like the way we can exchange information still in a very analog way too, like very much exists. And it could be walking into your local, your neighborhood coffee shop and saying, hey, I want to have an exhibition here. Like, what do you think? So just trying to, I think, just like start slow and small.
Public libraries.
Yeah.
Up here, they do, lots of them share work from their communities. Yeah.
That's great advice. I'm not even an artist and I'm writing it down. I think the last question that we've got before we will do our outro is for Naima. Jasmine says, I believe I saw your wedding in Vogue. Amazing. What did it mean to be the subject of a very visible and beautiful moment?
Oh, that's a big question. It was wonderful and also very strange because there were so many people commenting, I think, on uh, our wedding, but I guess you asked for that in some ways if it's public. But I think it was really beyond the publication. I think just for the kind of small group of people who are at our wedding, a lot of them who are queer and who maybe cannot share that with their families, that it was really about the beauty of being at a lesbian wedding and having so much family support, I think was really kind of the key thing that felt really important to me and really important to our friends and our families. So I think beyond the publication, it was just about like the visibility around having a moment that beautiful and being able to share it with the people that we love.
Beautiful. I think we have gotten to all of the questions, and since we're 1 minute to the top of the hour, I'm going to wrap it up and say, first of all, thank you so much to our incredible panelists and our moderator. This has been so wonderful. I know I've learned so much. Thank you to everyone who's joined us today and helped us celebrate Lesbian Visibility Week. The Curve Foundation thanks you. If you enjoyed this event, please, please, please donate. We are a nonprofit, so we rely on your generosity to continue uplifting LGBTQ plus women's stories and voices. So every contribution makes a meaningful difference. I dropped a bunch of links into the chat. So you've got our donation page, the Curve Foundation website, the Curve Magazine archive, and the Lesbian Visibility Week landing page. Feel free to explore, share, and stay connected. We've got lots more events going on for Lesbian Visibility Week. So once again, thank you to everyone who showed up. Thank you so much to our panelists for your time and your expertise, and happy Lesbian Visibility Week to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Oh, thank
everyone.
you so much.
Thank you everyone so much. Have a great rest of your day.
Oh, bye-bye.